Hey everybody, this is my ECS NFORCE9M-A socket AM2 Plus motherboard, and it has had 2 years of service, and now it doesn't want to work anymore. I bought this motherboard back in December of 2008 to go into the Mid-Tower Deluxe back then. Back in those days, it was coupled with an Athlon 64X2 4200 plus AM2 CPU and 4 gigabytes of DDR2 800 gig memory. As you can see here, the gig memory is still installed, and now this motherboard has a Phenom 2 quad-core 905E processor, the very energy efficient processor, with a 65 watt TDP. I started having issues with this motherboard back in summer 2010 when I had just a little over a year and a half of the service on it. And the issues will more or less be, you try to turn the machine on, the computer on, this board would not post. There were some times where it would work just fine. Like, let's say I could shut the computer down and start it back up, the motherboard would post just fine. But if you give it a week or so of being turned off, you'd have to remove the memory and the CMOS battery to make it work. Removing just the RAM would make it throw a beep error message for memory error. But you could stick memory back in and it still wouldn't post. You would literally have to take the CMOS battery out of the machine. Using the CMOS jumper wouldn't even work. Like I say, you'd have to completely take the CMOS battery out of the machine and no memory, turn the computer back on, let it throw an error message through the beep code, shut the machine off, stick the memory back on, and the CMOS battery back on, then it would work. But this was really frustrating because, I mean, every time it did this, I'd have to go in and reset the time, reset all the RAID settings. Well, not actually the RAID BIOS, but all the BIOS settings, turn the RAID back on, all that sort of stuff. It was very annoying. And I mean, it's kind of sad that a motherboard that's only about 2 years old is doing this. Now, this board will not post at all. I can remove the memory and the CMOS battery due to the sequence I was talking about earlier, and it will not fix the problem. This board just will not work. It refuses to work. It will do nothing but turn on and spin the fans. So, what I'm going to try to do is do a reflow procedure on this board. It has an NVIDIA chipset on it, and some of the NVIDIA chipsets are known to have issues with overheating, and the chip itself will actually lose solder joints with the motherboard, causing the board to not work like it's supposed to. This particular motherboard uses the GeForce 8100 series graphics chipset for hybrid SLI. So what I'm going to try to do is, like I said, I'm going to try to do a reflow procedure on this board, see if that fixes the problem. And I mean, it's ridiculous. This board is 2 years old, and it's already failing. Well, it started, like I said, it started failing when it was only 1.5 years old. This is a low-end ECS motherboard, $60 motherboard, the cheapest full-size HX motherboard Newegg had back in 2008, because I was on a strict budget. But it's still, I mean, it's really sad that a board like this would have stopped working after 2 years. So like I said, I'm going to try a reflow procedure and see if that fixes the problem. Okay, I removed the memory and the North Bridge, well, the chipset heatsink. And here is the NVIDIA GeForce 8100 chip. You can see. Let me zoom in a little bit. The GeForce 8100. Let's see, 720A-A2. Okay. And one thing I noticed right away is, like usual, they still use the old pink stuff, which in my opinion is a very sorry method of thermal transfer. I mean, this pink stuff is, I mean, it's the same crap they used back in 2000 on the Pentium 3s. I mean, those Pentium 3s didn't run that hot, but these newer chipsets do. Yeah, why they still use this crap, I don't know. I mean, thermal paste is cheap nowadays. I mean, you can, even the white stuff will work just fine. But yet they still choose to use this stuff, and yet they wonder why their boards fail after a few years. They start getting returns because their boards are not working anymore. So evidently this chip is overheated, and notice I even clicked on a fan. I even clicked on a 40mm fan to this heatsink to help cool it better. But I mean, how does that matter when the actual heat is still here on the chip die, not getting transferred to the heatsink because of that dumb crap here? So we're going to try reflowing this board. Okay, now let's go over the procedure of a reflow. So what you do is, first, you have to flip your motherboard over on its back side. Well, first off, if you're working with a motherboard that has both a separate north bridge and south bridge, and you're reflowing the north bridge, I recommend that you remove your CPU heatsink, the processor itself, and this retention bracket, if you can see. Remove all this because the heat from the heat gun will cause this plastic to melt, but in this case we're working with this single chip, which is located down here. So what we'll do now is go ahead and do what's called a 1-minute pre-treat. You start out with low on your heat gun, and this particular heat gun is a Milwaukee heat gun, and it is a, let's see, how many watts is this thing? It is a 1220, I believe. Yeah, no, 1200 watt heat gun. If I'm not mistaken, you can go to Walmart and get a Wagner 1000 heat gun for like $20 or so. These are definitely good things to have. I've heard of people reflowing motherboards in their oven, which I personally do not care much for that, because I mean, I don't care much for reflowing something like that in the oven that you cook your food in, if you know what I mean. So we'll go ahead and plug in this heat gun and get started. And of course, heat guns put out a lot of heat, so be very careful. In a particular area on this motherboard, let me go flip it around so you can see better. The area in particular on this motherboard is going to be right here. So we'll set the heat gun on low and start our timer. And go for 1 minute. And what you're going to do is just go in a circular motion in this particular area. And keep a good distance such as this. We have passed a minute, so we'll go ahead and clear the timer. Next step, we'll go ahead and flip the board over and then create our insulator for the rest of the board. I'll explain here in a minute. So what we have to do here is take some aluminum foil and create a cup, more or less, that goes around the north bridge chip to shield the rest of the board away from the excessive heat. Because you have stuff like capacitors, the plastic, that sort of stuff. You don't want that to, definitely don't want that stuff to get hot. Now, of course, I recommend removing the CMOS battery, which I'll go ahead and do now before we continue on. Okay, now we've created our heat shield. Now we're going to set the heat gun on high and go for 4 minutes of circular motion. And of course, this is the most crucial step. You got to be very careful because a heat gun on high puts out a lot of heat. Go ahead and turn the heat gun on to high and start the timer. Just like I was saying before, go in a circular motion. In which that case did happen when I reflowed an MS7207 motherboard from a emachines media center computer. We're almost through. 15 more seconds. Okay, we're done. We're done with the 4-minute procedure of high. So now what we'll do is go ahead and set the heat gun to low and go for an additional minute. This helps start the cool down process. So we'll turn the heat gun on to low and start the timer. And like I said, this goes for 1 minute. Okay. Next step, remove this tin foil, the aluminum foil. We'll now allow the board to cool for about 20 to 30 minutes. Okay. This motherboard only took just a little over 7 minutes to fully cool down. So the next step will be to, of course, clean this crap off and install some actual thermal compound and reattach it. And of course, if you had to remove your CPU and all that, reinstall all that. Okay, moment of truth. It's working. I got the LEDs hooked up backwards on the case, so look at the power light flashing, yet the hard drive LED staying lit. I'll have to fix that. It's been a long time since this Windows here has started. This is my spare machine. It's been so long since I've used it. It still has AVG on it. I switched back to I switched over to Microsoft Security Essentials back in May or so. Here it is, October. And of course, like I say, the lights are backwards. But have a look at this case. I had one short video clip of this thing one time before. Notice how these bubble lights change colors. Isn't that cool? The bottom LEDs go between blue, green, and red. Looks pretty dang cool. It's got the, like I said, this ECS motherboard is the board that used to be in the mid-tower Lux before November 2010. Anyways, it's up and running. So if you have any questions or comments about reflowing motherboard, feel free to ask.